do you want us to sit?
I think if you go there, and then we have one at each end of the other sofa, and my mic is not live, I can tell that. Hello, everyone. Let me just see if my mic's working. Can you hear me at the back? Yes, it sounds better now. Right. Welcome, everybody. My name's Giles Whittell. I'm an editor at Tortoise, and we're doing this is CBI's event. It's CBI's daily check-in with COP on Nature Day today. So there's a special emphasis there. Welcome to everyone in the room, and especially welcome to everyone online. I have reason to believe there's quite a lot of you. Time is short, so let's go right ahead. I'll introduce our speakers as we come to them, I think is probably best. And I should say that we're going to be joined by Sarah Hanson-Young from the Australian Greens, who, like many people in Glasgow today, has been contending with roadblocks and protests and rain, and she's going to be arriving imminently. So we're looking forward to having her. But first, Tom Thackray, CBI's Director of Decarbonisation. We were just saying before we started, 190,000 members of the CBI, and you're responsible for decarbonising all of them. Putting that aside for a second, we're sort of a week into COP. There have been a lot of very punchy announcements. What's your overall impression of how it's going so far?
Thanks, Giles. I'm not sure I'm ready to take responsibility for all of the 190,000 carbon footprints yet, but certainly really ready to support businesses in their efforts in this area. But yeah, I think going into COP, there was a lot of, I guess people were kind of willing it to fail in a way, and the mood coming in wasn't that positive. You know, there's all the talk about, you know, the Chinese aren't turning up, the Russians aren't turning up, what's this actually going to achieve? But I think over this week, there's been a sort of gradual realization that it is achieving things. And not just the sort of headline level country commitments. Actually, that's the destination, that's the what. And it's sometimes quite far in the future. But actually, the interim targets that we're establishing and some of the announcements around technologies have been really, really interesting. So the Glasgow breakthroughs that we saw earlier this week, the mobilization of private finance led by Mark Carney, these are things that businesses can really engage with, and particularly when you've got something which is looking ahead to a 2030 timeframe. Right. For many businesses, that's tomorrow. You know, that's something that they will take out of this summit and action when they get back to their firm on a Monday morning. So that's really, really positive, I think. I would say though that yesterday's sort of youth and public engagement day and the protests that we had on the street, and there's out there again today. The tone of those demonstrations is still very, very challenging, very, very angry, and I think that there's mistrust around whether politicians and business, let's be clear, are going to be able to deliver on some of the things that they're setting out. So, the challenge for business organisations like the CBI, all of our members, is to act really, really quickly on the back of this to show that it's not just words, it's actions as well. 2 points really quickly. You mentioned Carney.
You didn't mention G-fans by name, but the 130 trillion number, just briefly, is that too big to take seriously?
I think it's just a kind of symbolisation of how many financial businesses are engaged in this topic, really. Right. I think, we set out the scale of money available. What we haven't set out is how we mobilise that, how we move that into the real economy so that it supports businesses themselves. And that's where governments working with businesses can sort of set the frameworks to enable that to happen. So to be technical about it, things like the negotiations around Article 6 of the Paris Treaty, which is happening at the moment, there's still a lot to play for in terms of getting that finance into the real economy. Right.
No, it's a good point. I mean, John Kerry was saying here, I think I lose track now, yesterday or the day before, that if the energy transition is on the scale that we think it is the single biggest market opportunity ever in human history. So I suppose if you frame it like that, then you can't really pick a number that's too big. Just one other thing, very briefly. You mentioned the youth protest yesterday. Do you think the organisers have missed a trick in terms of not literally inviting more of them through security into the grey zone? Blue zone.
Maybe it is grey, I don't know.
Well, it's a bit greyer in there.
Freudian slip. Of colour. I think I've been struck this week. This is my first COP, so I think I'm sort of learning what it's all about. But I think I've been struck that actually what goes on in the blue zone is very important, but maybe not always that interesting. It's detailed negotiations, quite legalistic sometimes. And actually, what's been more compelling is the conversations that have been happening around and outside of the secure zones. So, and I think those voices have been very much a part of those discussions and are very much a part of COP as a result.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Professor Callum Roberts. There's the youth of the world and there are the oceans of the world. And I'm not trying to sort of make an equivalence there, but the reason we're all here, ultimately, is to try and shrink our species' carbon footprint, right? And we were just discussing before we came in the proportion of the planet that the oceans cover and the proportion that are not actually part of a jurisdiction, a formal jurisdiction. So from your perspective as a marine biologist, hello, Sarah, thank you very much for fighting your way. We'll bring you in just a second. We're just talking about oceans, actually, which will be a nice segue to Australia.
Great.
Yeah.
Great.
How important are the oceans as part of this sort of global carbon footprint shrinking solution that we're all after?
Well, the oceans are not 71% of the planet. That's what we think of them as, because that's the amount of the surface of the Earth that they occupy. But they're actually 97% of the living space on planet Earth, which means that they are profoundly important to everything that happens on the planet. They are the kind of machinery of life. And so...
how do you get to that number? Is that because...
There's a lot of depth to it.
Oh, I see. But you're not ruling out part of the terrestrial planet as unlivable?
No.
Okay.
No, so it really is an immense part of the biosphere, and the biosphere is what keeps all of us in business. Now, the ocean is the ultimate sink for carbon, and so, when carbon gets into the ocean, some of it eventually ends up in deep-sea sediments and is locked away for periods of thousands of years and millions of years. And what we need to understand better is what are the processes by which it comes from the atmosphere into marine life and eventually ends up in a place which is safe from the point of view of global warming. So what we realize now is that you can't fix climate change without involving the ocean, and we need to pay far closer attention to protecting the ocean so that it functions effectively as a way of drawing down carbon from the atmosphere. And I think that marine habitats, lively, intact, thriving marine habitats managed very differently from the way that we manage them now, are a big part of the solution to mitigating climate change, slowing it down, and allowing us to decarbonize the economy.
And in concrete terms, governments obviously have a measure of control over their own territorial waters. Beyond, they have less, / none at all, but you have businesses nonetheless operating there. And you were saying just before we came on, the Chinese government, I'm going to name names, setting up a long-range fishing fleet to go and trawl everywhere on Earth. How can you bring pressure to bear on corporate or governmental bodies operating sort of way over the horizon like that in order to protect marine environments?
Well, I think, a lot of the sea is quite remote from people, and to get there it's expensive. We're operating in the high seas largely as a result of government subsidy. And one of the big agenda items at the World Trade Organization talks, just coming up, is going to be the removal of harmful capacity-enhancing fishing subsidies, which means that we're actually paying people to destroy the environment in effective terms. So there is a policy lever that we can pull, which will help to reduce the harm that's being done to those high seas fish resources and other resources. Of course, you mentioned China, and China at the moment is building this immense fishing fleet, partly out of geopolitical ambitions. It fits in with their worldview of how they want to relate to the rest of the world, and that isn't sustainable in any sense. We are already beyond the limits of what the ocean can provide in a sustainable way. So that's going to be a net loss to the ocean capital, and we're going to have to deal with that some way, probably through international diplomacy.
Right. It feels, I mean, I've just heard about that for the first time. It feels we're very much at the first step of that. I mean,
Yeah, I think that's true.
Yeah. Well, thank you anyway. I'm sure we'll come back to the oceans. But Sarah, Senator from South Australia and a member of the Australian Green Party. Do I have that right?
That's right, yes.
So tell us about the particular challenges that you face working, I mean, given that it's Nature Day and we're in a sort of a business setting, working with businesses in Australia to tackle this problem. We are very aware, even though we're a long way from Australia, of your country's dependence on coal, particular corporate interest.
Been quite topical this week, hasn't it?
So talk us through that.
Look, obviously we've got a number of things going on in Australia right now. 2 summers ago we had those horrible bushfires, climate fires as I refer to them, because I want to make sure there's no ambiguity about this. They were fuelled and intensified because the climate is changing. That in and of itself, those fires destroyed billions of hectares of forest, of coastal scrub. There were areas, my family owned property in Far East Gippsland in Victoria, and it's cool tempered rainforest. And it burnt from the top of the hills right down to the gullies. And when we went back afterwards, the animals just charred at the bottom of where the creeks are. The animals ran down there when the fire came. They thought they would be safe, but it was so intense and so dry that for the first time, we'd never seen fires like this. So that's going on in the psyche of the Australian community. But then we have the issue of, yes, Australia is a huge coal exporter, one of the largest exporters of fossil fuels in the world, actually. And the political power of the coal and gas industry in Australia is huge. We can't discount that. So there's this tension.
But is that changing?
It is changing. And one of the things that has really struck me, and I'd be interested, and I'm talking to people, of course, while we're here for COP26 about this in relation to the rest of the world, but I think I've been really inspired, actually, by the shift of the Australian community. I think COVID has changed people's mindset about nature. I think there is a real sense that when you can get outside, you appreciate it. People are rethinking about what they hold dear, what they value, and the environment is at the top, or at least in those top 2 or 3 issues that people are naming now when political parties do polling, questions. So there is a mindset shift. People are tuning in. The issue, of course, is what do we do? Well, how do we turn that concern for nature, kind of reconnection with the environment into the action and the policy change? And I think business has a really big role to play here. And I know we've got to be we've got to be careful that we don't just allow greenwashing to happen. Let's be upfront about that. That's not going to help anybody in the long run. But there are genuinely businesses who want to engage in this, not just because they know it's good for their customer base, but because we're all part of the same community and you can see what's going on. You want to be a responsible business. And then there's the dividend of the economic boost that comes with doing the right thing and being able to tap into this shift.
Well, let me ask about that, because I speak as someone who's only ever spent 8 hours on the ground in Australia, but I have the impression from following projects like Sun Cable, which wants to take solar power in large quantities to Singapore, and also from a guy whose name I'm blanking on, who's one of the partners in that project, he's a famous Australian miner, but
Twiggy Forrest.
Right, really proactive, but I have the general impression that in many respects business is moving ahead of government in Australia. Is that right? Is that what's happening?
Yes, it is. And I think what's happening is the community and business are kind of waking up and saying, really those bushfires was a huge wake-up call.
Right.
And it wasn't just the fires. our cities, our major cities, Melbourne, Sydney, the capital, where I spend half my time in Canberra, were inundated with hazardous smoke for weeks. So long before people were wearing masks for COVID, for months before COVID hit, we were all wearing masks because of the smoke. So it really had started to impact on people's actual lives. And so business and community are well and truly ahead of where the government is. Right. And what we're seeing, we've had a huge political debate over the years in Australia. Recently, our Prime Minister finally committed to net zero by 2050, and I think perhaps expected a boost and a good pat on the back. Frankly, the rest of us went, oh, hang on a minute, why are we talking about 2050? This has got to be about 2030. Right. And what are you actually going to do? Because if we don't actually have a strong commitment to get out of coal, to stop opening new coal mines, to stop opening new gas fields, destroying koala habitat in order to build a coal mine, which is crazy, then these words mean nothing.
To what extent do you think, and it may be zero, COP and the prospect of coming here and being on the naughty step influenced Scott Morrison, your Prime Minister, to finally set a net zero target?
I think it influenced enormously. I think there was the Prime Minister knew that he could not come here without some commitment. So he's done the bare bare minimum, and has missed the memo that everybody else is saying, well, where's your 2030 lift? Where's your commitment to methane gas reduction? Where's your commitment to transitioning out of coal and stopping new coal projects? Yes, I think it was very clear. Back home, there was a debate about whether he would come or not. Yeah. At first, he said he wouldn't. And I suspect that's because he wasn't sure he could even get net zero through his party room. He's in coalition. He's the Conservative side, the Liberal Party. Always confusing when you travel overseas and talk about the Liberal Party as the Conservatives. But the National Party, who are really very much moved from being the agricultural-based party in Australia to being the party in those areas where it is heavily dominated by the coal industry and coal mining and gas. So while they still say it's the party for the farmers, it's actually the party for the fossil fuel companies.
Wow. Totally fascinating, and we'll come back to that if we have time. But first, Miguel Veiga-Pestana. Your job title really interests me, right? Chief Sustainability Officer for Reckitt Benckiser. Reckitt, for people who are not familiar, you will know the brands, right? Clearasil, Nurofen, Durex, many others, but also Dettol, incredibly high profile, particularly now. So, and I don't mean this to be flippant, actually. How important are you within the organisation now, as Chief Sustainability Officer?
You mean me personally?
You personally.
Gosh, okay. Well, look...
because it's emblematic in a sense.
Well, I sit on the executive.
Right.
So I see myself as a peer amongst my colleagues on the exec, and I report to the CEO. So I'm one of a leadership team of 9. Right. So I think I probably one of the, I would argue, top leaders in the business. My ambition is to talk myself out of a job.
Okay. But the fact that you're there, I mean, let's take a step back and look at business more generally. I know that one of you've been in business, but you've also been in the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
I did.
So
I worked for Bill Gates.
You have a sort of a broad view. Is it just something that people say to themselves in business to make them feel better, or is it actually happening that sustainability, ESG requirements have moved out of a silo into the boardroom?
Look, my view of why I'm there is because I think that it's only through business that we can actually make the difference that we need to make. Governments obviously have a critical role, but I think ultimately business has to change. I think in terms of what you're seeing happening is that there is a growing recognition that we've reached that tipping point, and actually that this is not just about de-risking, it's actually about growing business. It's going to be key to the future growth of a company. Now, there's a lot of signals that are demonstrating why that's the case. I can't tell you how many more conversations I've had about ESG in the last 18 months. It's there, every investor meeting, every conversation we have, it's one of the first things that we're being asked about. And it isn't just about questions. People want to see the data, they want to see the roadmaps, they want to see how we're going to do things. So it's not just a tick in the box exercise anymore. It's not just about tell me that, what is your policy. They want the evidence base behind that. There's a heightened degree of transparency that is being asked more and more of us. And not just limited to the investors, we have that coming from our customers. We work with obviously a lot of retail customers. All of those companies want to know that what they're putting on their shelves meets their sustainability goals and ambitions. And so we have a lot of dialogue with them increasingly about what kind of products and services are we offering. It's coming from our consumers, the people who actually buy our brands. There's a lot we've seen of heightened desire from people to want to buy brands that they trust are going to do the right thing. Now, we talk a lot about greenwashing, but look, if I look at the business that I'm part of, we've just committed to saying that we will be net zero across our value chains by 2040. And some people would say, well, why is that going to take so long? Why is it 2040? Why are you not more ambitious and more bold? Well, part of the reason for that is that about 75% of the carbon embedded in our footprint is actually in the products and the way that the people who buy them use them. Right. And so, or what happens to them at the end of their life. So we're only talking about reinventing what it means to market, because you're having to start to think in much more closed-loop systems, more circular systems. That's quite a shift in what we do today. So it is really about reinventing marketing in many ways. And at the same time, you've got to be able to then work to make people aware of the sorts of things they have to do. But what most people want is they want us to take care of a lot of the things. They expect that. That's the trust piece, that, they expect us to be doing more. But also we need to make it simple. It needs to be something people can understand, can get their heads around, because they get inundated with information. There's a lot of people feeling like, I just don't, overwhelmed almost with this. But the question is, what can we do to help them make it easy, make it convenient, make it simple, and in fact, make behaviors habits. So shift something from one behavior to a habit that's long-lasting. And that's about how brands change the conversations that they have. So these are quite big things that we're talking about. And then, by the way, we also have an obligation to report it all and track it and measure it. And so these are some things that are starting to be built into business, hot-wired into businesses. That requires quite, again, some big shifts. So I think what you're hearing from companies is that we're here because we know that that's where we all have to go. I agree with what's been said earlier. There's a heightened degree of optimism. I think there's more of us here. There's certainly more of a desire to do more. Right. But I also think that we know the accelerator pedal has to go on faster. And with that comes kind of, I think, a little bit of nervousness. I mean, can we do it? Can we do it in the time frames we're talking about? So what's it going to take for us to do? So what I'm coming away with is both optimism and nervousness at the same time. I have both feelings like, can I do this quickly enough? Yeah. Is it going to be enough to make the difference? But actually, I'm really hopeful because I'm hearing and seeing evidence of a willingness to change.
Thank you. Yeah, no one's more skeptical of greenwashing than me, I was going to say, but I'm sure there are people who are more skeptical of greenwashing than me. But your starting point there, that it's not just about de-risking, it's about growing. If that's true, and all the indicators are, then I really do believe that is going to lead from the billions and tens of billions to the trillions and the finance that's actually required. But you also mentioned, engaging consumers. And Callum, I wanted to bring you in on this. Nothing has engaged consumers in the broad environmental debate quite like plastics in the oceans, right? And you were an advisor on Blue Planet 2, right?
I was, yeah.
So here's my question. Is that a red herring as far as climate change and carbon is concerned?
No, I don't think so. I think carbon, you know, the carbon embodied in that plastic is very significant, and the plastics industry is growing rapidly. And I think it's emblematic as well of the way in which we are abusing the resources of the earth, that we consider that something which is used for a few minutes could be durable on the scale of thousands of years. You know, that's just simply wrong. And I think that's it's been a great way of engaging a broader public in conversations around sustainability and what that really means.
But, okay, I take that point. Sometimes I've become a little frustrated having conversations like this, and a lot of people new to the party, as it were, seem to think, well, if we can only crack plastics in the oceans, then we've cracked climate change. And there isn't. I
mean, plastics in the oceans is a problem, but it's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem used to be overfishing and destructive fishing. The biggest problem now is climate change and ocean acidification, which is the kind of evil twin of climate change in the sea, caused also by carbon dioxide. So we've got bigger problems that need solving than plastic.
Yeah.
But solving plastic should not be something we put on the back burner, I think.
And just briefly, since we've got you here, is there a promising line of research or technology that is deployable at scale, which could enhance the ocean's function as a carbon sink?
Well, there's more policy levers that we could be pulling. And one of the things that we're doing is extracting too much marine life using destructive methods like bottom trawling and dredging, dragging nets and dredges across the seabed. And that's stirring up carbon, it's releasing some of it back to the atmosphere, it's reducing the ocean's ability to absorb and lock away carbon. So we could actually pull that policy lever very quickly by protecting much, much greater areas of the ocean from destructive and extractive uses. And that's where COP26 really aligns with COP15 of the Convention on Biological Diversity, which is happening in the coming months, where the world is pursuing a target of trying to protect 30% of the planet by 2030.
Okay. Can I just say something on this one? Because I think it's, I mean, it's interesting. Blue Planet as one program had it was a huge kickstart, actually, but in several countries, notably here in the UK, actually, for raising awareness of why this matters. So sometimes these emblematic programs, whilst you may say boil things down to very simplistic issues, they don't actually. They also have the impact of inspiring people and making people aware of what more needs to be done. So sometimes we can get quite locked down saying, well, it's just about this. Well, no, it's about opening people's minds and shifting people's mindsets, because that's actually where we're going. I think one of the really interesting things we have to consider about where we are now, the last 10 years, I think the UK Climate Change Committee recently came out with this report that said the last 10 years, when we've talked about climate change, we've talked about it through the lens of technology and infrastructure. And really, the next 10 years, if we're going to get close to getting to that reduction, is all about behaviors and changing the behaviors of people to go alongside it, because the technology and the infrastructure is the enabler. But the thing that will make a difference is us and what we do and what we're willing to do. And I think that's a very big conversation that we're going to have to unlock, because ultimately things find their way into the ocean because of what people do with the bottles that they have.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily, you can't just sort of say somebody went out and did this deliberately. It's because there's probably a lack of infrastructure, or there's people who aren't aware of the impact of what they're doing. So there's an element of this which is also about individuals and how we as people all have a role to play in this. And I know that sounds a bit maybe motherhood and apple pie, but I absolutely fundamentally believe in it. I think that's the only way forward.
Just before we run out of time, I want to give Sarah and Tom just a quick Sarah, briefly, reality check time. Australian voters thought they were having a climate change election last time. Wasn't like that at all. Next time, will it be different?
Well, I really hope so. And I think this moment that we're in here globally, but also the role that Australia officially has played, which has not been a particularly positive one, and yet is getting a lot of backlash back home. I think our election is only 3-4 months away, so it's good timing for this.
Right.
But people can see it. They want change, and they want our political leaders to make those hard decisions. I just want to say one thing on the plastics. It just struck me. Maybe it's the gateway drug, you know?
Right.
This is it is so important to have something that people can see and touch and feel. We're asking huge change to occur. And for politicians to be able to drive that, they need to be able to bring the community with them and be trusted. And if you can make a change in the plastics, then you can be seen to be trustworthy on the big things that have to happen.
Thanks so much. We're stealing a little bit of time. I'm sorry if we've lost some of the people online. I don't know how that works. But Tom, I want to give you the last word. Yesterday and today we've got protests on the street. Just come back to this issue. How do businesses generally, big and small, persuade people who care about this passionately and who Boris Johnson himself has acknowledged will be angry if there's not real results from this? How do businesses persuade those people that they're listening and responding and changing their behaviour?
So I think we're seeing an explosion of businesses that we work with setting themselves real tangible targets, not just for 2050, but the interim targets, really bearing down on emissions. And they're starting to talk to their customers and their staff about it and putting those plans into action. It's very complicated and it's challenging for some companies. The good thing though, and the sort of the nexus of this conversation has been all about nature, right? So I think what they found is that when they talk about carbon, it's quite interesting to their customers. When they talk about nature, it gets people excited, And you can't cut carbon without dealing with nature protection. So they are very codependent issues. So if we can harness that, then I think we'll make great strides. I'm also conscious of the fact that Glasgow could be a bit of a bubble. There's businesses here who are very much engaged and are on that pathway already. But there are thousands, millions of small businesses who just need a clear instruction about what they need to do next. And I think larger businesses working with their supply chains, organisations like the CBI can be fundamental in taking what's been agreed at COP and translating that for business in the weeks and months ahead.
And biodiversity is the focus of the next COP.
Indeed.
Sarah, Tom, Miguel, Callum, thank you very much. This has been the CBI's Daily Check-In with COP, and they will start again after one rest day, I think, on Monday. So do join us again then. Thank you very much.